Hey there, welcome to the Literary Escapes podcast. I'm Becky, and I'm glad you're here today. If you're a fan of books that give you an escape or let you explore other cultures, then you're definitely in the right place. So I'm glad you've joined us today. Stick around, we've got a great author interview for you, so let's jump right in. Interviewing author Emily Bleeker. She is an award-winning best-selling author and has a new book coming out December 1st. So let's jump right into the interview. Welcome, Emily. So how are you today?
I'm great. It's a cold day here, but
Where are you at?
Chicagoland.
Oh, that's right. Yeah. Okay. I bet it is chilly up there.
Yeah, finally. It's been actually quite disturbingly warm, so we're good.
That's curious. Yeah. I'm down in Florida, and I hate to use the word chilly, but it's chilly for us Floridians.
Oh, where are you in Florida? I grew up in Winter Haven.
Okay. I live in DeLand, so
Oh, okay.
yeah.
Very cool.
So small world. I love that.
Yeah.
So how did you get into writing? I see you've got some interesting things in your background as an educator. You do music and improv. And so how did all of that lead to writing?
I didn't actually consider myself a writer for quite some time. I was an educator. I taught little kids though. So I started teaching writing to the third, fourth, and fifth grade academically talented and gifted kids. That's
Fun.
I got an endorsement in that. And it was interesting. And I would write at the same time they would write, which I found very enjoyable. And then we would all share our writing, which was my first time I let anybody hear anything I wrote was children. So, so it just kind of was something I did in secret for a long time. And you could have worse secrets, I guess.
Absolutely.
Right.
Now,
But
when you wrote, did you write like children stuff
well, I mean, with them, it
with
wasn't like
them?
children's stuff. It was stuff that wasn't like explicit in any way, but
Right. Yeah.
whatever
Children
the prompt
appropriate.
was, yeah, whatever the prompt was, I just wrote it, you know?
Okay. Okay.
So yeah, at that time I was definitely not diving into the darker things that sometimes I explore in my writing now. But it was short. It was short. And so I started reading books about writing at that time too. So, but I
Okay.
was not trained as a writer. And then when I turned 30, I had had cancer in my 20s.
Wow.
And I had only been given like a 20%, I'm sorry, 30% chance of turning 30. And
Holy
so,
moly.
yeah, so when it happened, it felt like a miracle, like I was given back
Absolutely.
all this time. And so I made some goals for my 30s. And one of my goals was that I would write a manuscript. And I
Nice.
never thought it would be published, but that's how it started. Is I just was like, all right, I'll write this. And for the next 3 years, I wrote and wrote and wrote just whenever I had time. I had a baby during that time. So she would be nursing and I would be writing off to the
Yeah.
side with one hand. And so that's how I wrote Wreckage.
That's how a lot of the first manuscripts get done, isn't it?
Right?
I
With
love that.
children about.
Exactly. Just fit in between life
Yeah,
and, whatever the life
exactly.
looks like, that's how it goes. So that's amazing. So it looks like a lot of your books are more women's fiction. Is that accurate?
Yeah, I think we call them book club fiction. So,
Okay. I love that. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, because I actually have a book club and it looks like stuff
Oh,
that I would choose. So
I love that.
that's and I was noticing you also have like questions for book clubs in the back of your books.
Yes.
I love that.
Oh, that's
I
great.
even if I wasn't doing it for book club, I still love that because it's fun to see what someone else thinks you should think about as you're reading or after you've read. And I just think that's so interesting when authors do that or publishers, whoever puts it
The
together.
authors, as far as I know, I wrote all those. So as far
Okay.
as I know, authors write them, but I don't
I
know.
love that. Okay.
Oh.
And so you wrote your manuscript, and then what did you do with it?
So with Wreckage, that was my first one.
Okay.
I wrote, I actually I think I let some people read it. That's what happened next is I was like, "Oh, you want to read this?" And they did. And then they're like, "Oh, I enjoyed this book. You should try and get it published." And I always say that I Googled how to get my book published, and the internet like laughed at me because they're like, "That's what everybody wants to do." And so I learned that you had to have a query, and you had to get an agent, which means you needed to write a query letter.
Mhm.
And that's a very specific type of a letter
Right.
for people who don't know. I said this the other day, and the person I was talking to in an interview was like, "I don't know what that is." So I'm like, I should probably remember to
Okay.
explain it and not just speak in writing language.
Yeah, author talk. Yeah.
Yeah. But it's a very specialized letter that you write to an agent to say, "Hey, please read my book." But it only is supposed to be like 350 words, and it's supposed to be like basically like the blurb on the back of your book, like, and then you're enticing them to want to
Yeah, you
have
have to
it read.
capture somebody's attention very
Yes.
quickly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then you're like, "Hey, want to read it?" So I, at that time, was like, I'm still not actually going to try and get this published. I'm just going to try and write a query letter. So I spent the next 6 months trying to write a query letter. And I went on like websites like Agent Query Connect. I connected with people there. We like read each other's query letters. I made a lot of
Nice.
great connections. And then there was like a competition where it wasn't even really a competition. It was like, the agent offered, if whoever sends in their query letter on this one day, I will give you feedback on it. And I was like,
Wow.
that's pretty cool,
That's
but
an
I'm
awesome
not
opportunity. Yeah.
exactly. But I was like, I'm not going to do it. It was too scary for me at that point. And one of the ladies that I had met through one of these websites swore at me a lot and said, "You have to do it." And so I did. And it's not like I got picked up by that agent, but she said, "This is a great query letter. Your pages are great. I want to pass this on to somebody else." And it gave me the confidence that I needed
Nice.
to go for the next phase of like querying.
That's
So
awesome. Did you not want to do self-publishing, or was that not a thing at that point, or?
I was so far away from feeling confident about my writing at that time in my life
Yeah.
that I was not in a place to be like, "Yeah, I'm going to definitely publish this on my own." I
Okay.
was just like, "What is the next step? I'll do that."
Yeah, I love that.
And so I just kept doing the next step, the next
Mhm.
step, the next step until it ended up that the book was published.
That's awesome. And so when was that first book, Wreckage, when was that published?
That was published in 2015.
That's awesome. What an amazing journey that must have been.
It was very surreal,
Yeah.
like that moment that my agent called me. I was at Boy Scout camp with my two little
Living
kids.
your real life. Yep.
Yeah. And she was like, "Can you have a call?" And I'm like, "Absolutely." And she was like, "Congratulations, you're going to be a published author."
Holy
And
moly.
it was just it was one of those moments that was like, whoa, you don't know is a life-changing moment, but is a life-changing moment.
That's so fun. And
Yeah.
that moment that you first hold your book,
Oh yeah, I
that's
cried.
pretty surreal. Yeah.
Yeah,
I
it's
love
that
that.
that new baby moment where you're like, "You're so beautiful.
I did this.
I can't believe you came out of me." Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. That's one of the weird things about publishing a book is you have this thing come out of you that's so personal, but then
Yeah.
you have to let it go and
Yes.
kind of detach from it almost and let other people have their opinions about your baby.
It starts to belong to other people.
It
That's why
does.
after a couple of it's really after the first week after the book comes out, I stop reading reviews. So because I'm like, all right, this belongs to the people now. You guys go
Yeah.
discuss. I will just, go work on something else because I can't change this. I
It
can
is what
only
it
change.
is, and you're moving on. I mean, by that point, you've already started writing the next book and
Oh yeah.
you're moved on. So, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, right now I've already finished another book when this book is coming out. So it is
Yeah.
very
It's
interesting.
interesting how the cycle is
Yeah,
because you've got a book coming out, but you've already got another one in the pipe and you're probably already
right,
writing another one. And
right.
so,
At
yeah,
least planning out another one. So
yeah. That's
it is.
so, I mean, because so many authors, when I talk to them about whatever book has just come out, they kind of have to
Yeah.
remember what it was.
Yeah.
It's like, wait
Thankfully,
a minute, that was a year and a half ago that I wrote
exactly.
that.
Thankfully, the book I just finished writing is actually a follow-up to the book that just came out. So it's
Okay.
all the same names, so I can remember them. That
That's
makes it a little
interesting. Is
easier.
it a series or just a
I'm calling it a companion piece because
okay?
it's not exactly a sequel. So When We Were Enemies is a dual timeline, and it has Vivian Snow, which is back in time before she becomes famous, and then there's her granddaughter many, many years later, and she's working with a documentary team for when after her grandmother has passed away. The story I just wrote is all of the space in between that. So
Oh.
after Vivian becomes famous to when the end of that story is. It's like
Ooh.
6 decades, which was a little ambitious
Yeah,
on
that's a
my part,
little
but
challenging to put into your 350 pages or whatever.
yes, exactly. It ended up being a lot of words, but it was actually such a great. I've never done this before. I've never written a follow-up or anything else that filled in any kind of blank. So it was an interest. I was glad they trusted in me to do that.
As a reader, and obviously I'm guessing you're a reader as well, because
Oh
most,
yeah.
writers are readers as well.
Yeah.
I love finding out about characters that I enjoy. And
Yeah.
so as an author, it's like, the story probably just because you had to have at least pieces of it, but readers want to hear it as well, which is so fun. They want to stay in that world and
Which I
enjoy it.
hope they do. Like, I love that they want to. And I get messages after each book. I think there's only one book I didn't get what is there a sequel to this?
Uh-huh.
Every time. Is there a sequel to this? Is there
I
a
want to
sequel?
hear so and so's story. What
Yes,
happened to so and
exactly.
so?
And so this one I get to finally be like, yes, there is. You get to actually hear the
Yay!
story. So I'm just waiting for them to be like, well, what about somebody else's story? It's like, well, we're just going to
We're
Vivian.
going to go
That's
here. Yeah.
as far as we're going for now.
That's awesome. So, how do story ideas come to you?
I I've always said I have too many ideas. Like that's actually what made me realize I was a writer before I wrote a lot. There was once a lady who came to me and was like, and saw Wreckage come out and be successful. And she was a stay-at-home mom. And she's like, I'd like to be a writer. And I was so excited because I'm like, I love finding another writer. Like, this is possible. Tell me what your ideas are. She's like, oh, I don't have any ideas. I just
Oh,
want to make more money. And I was like, well, good luck. Writing
yeah,
is not
exactly.
traditionally,
This is not the fast way to money.
no, this is not. And so I was like, you probably now know you're not a writer if you don't have
If you don't have
ideas.
any ideas, and yeah,
Exactly. So mine just come to me as just a little thought. I'll write them down. I'll talk to somebody about them. I'll be like, "Ooh, what about this?" My daughter came to me with an idea once.
oh, fun.
Yeah, and my son helped me like figure out a twist in one of my books. So my kids are really, really. He's going
That's
into
really
creative
cool.
writing though, so I'm like, now I almost feel guilty, like I stole it from him, but he gave it. He gave it willingly.
That's
Um,
fun.
yeah, so it's really just playing around with ideas and having family and friends who are willing to do that. And I always say to my husband, I'm like, oh my gosh, you are so sweet to just sit here and talk through this imaginary world and imaginary people with me.
That's so fun.
So it
Yeah.
is that. So that's really how I do it. It's really just already there. It's just finding people who are willing to let me talk
Hmm.
about it, because that's the
I
best way to
yeah, I
figure it
get
out.
that. My husband read my first book that I wrote,
Uh,
and it's a sweet romance, and that's not
uh,
even close to his genre.
oh, that's so
It was
sweet.
really sweet, and I was
Yeah.
so grateful that he did that. So
And was he like, and so who is me? Which one is
we didn't even go there. But he was like, "Oh, that's cool," So I was like,
Oh, that's great. I love that.
so that's funny. So you have strong female characters in your books, and
Yeah.
how do you come up with them, and how do you figure out what you want their journey to be?
Yeah, what's so interesting is I've noticed that people kind of have a hard time with with strong female characters.
That's
They have
curious, isn't it?
It is like, and so men can have so many flaws. Like, if you just think about something as familiar as Twilight and how flawed Edward is. If you truly look at that character, you're like, whoa, there is so much messed up with that guy, but yet everybody's in love with him.
He's Edward.
Oh,
Yeah, exactly.
exactly. But then you have an anxious, flawed female character, and it's like, oh, she's so annoying, you know? So that is definitely the balance that is difficult to have, is having women who have flaws, because also nobody wants a perfect person either.
Right.
You
Because
know?
then they're unrealistic and
Exactly.
unrelatable and whatever.
And
so,
I always wait for like my edits for them to be like, oh, is this person likable enough? You know? And I do think that I don't know that I have answers. I think it's just tweaking. I think it's just going through and tweaking, and then also not caring if some people don't like your character.
Yeah.
Just like we have to not care if people don't like us when we're being authentic. So, you know, it is an important note. It's not something to completely ignore, but like sometimes a strong woman is like she's a strong woman, and that's just who she is.
Yeah.
So it is really about feeling sure of who your characters are and being authentic to that. And there is something that I always say is my characters make a lot of decisions that I wouldn't make, and that I haven't even made for them. I just suddenly start writing something I thought was going to happen next, and I'm like, you know what?
Are you sure you want to go there? Yeah.
She wouldn't do that. That's not how she'd react. That's not how she'd respond. So sticking with that kind of authenticity has always been kind of important for me.
I like that. Yeah. So tell us about When We Were Enemies. And that's coming out in
December
12
1st.
days.
Yeah. It is right now. It's the Amazon First Reads pick for.
I saw that. Yeah.
So it's out in just that form. But When We Were Enemies is, like I said, it's a dual timeline, and it is it's about When We Were Enemies. The title is really about how Italy during World War II started out as our enemies. Yeah. And there were POW camps in the United States where prisoners of war came and were brought from the fight in Europe. And so, and there were over 100,000 prisoners of war here in the US.
Holy moly. How did you learn about that?
My grandmother worked at a POW camp, and my dad just said it offhandedly years ago before I was a writer or acknowledged I was a writer. And I was like, what do you mean she worked at a POW?
Right. Where was she? Like,
yeah. And I had and he told me that she worked at a POW camp, met an Italian priest there, and that they had their own platonic love story where they became really close friends and wrote to each other. He would draw postcards, send them to her till he died. Wow. And so like they had this connection, you know, and I was like, ooh, that's kind of juicy and interesting. And like, it just was also just something I love history. So as time went on, I looked up like POW camps in the US, and this is so funny. I was just rearranging my office, but like here they were
Michigan POW camps.
This is Michigan. The one I wrote about was in Indiana, but they're fascinating. So at first it was Italian POWs, and then German POWs came a little bit later. So during the summer of 1943, that's really about the only time that there were Italian POWs in these camps. Okay. Because in the fall of 1943, Italy switched sides and they surrendered, and then they became our allies. Gotcha. And so that's what the title is about. It's about this summer that she gets to know this.
So there's this window of time
when we were enemies.
Yeah.
And then 90% of those POWs, those Italian prisoners, joined the Italian service unit and became part of the U.S. Army. And so
did most of those stay in the U.S. then?
They all stayed in the U.S. So they were not able to go back home. So the Geneva Convention was really the conventions is what they really followed them closely. it was something that was actually really kind of frustrating at first for Americans, because they're like, these prisoners are getting treated so well, and we're not getting treated well.
Right.
And America was like, well, we just agreed on these guys after World War I,
Yeah, we have to follow this. Yeah.
we need to follow these rules, and they should be following them too. And so they followed the rules. It's brought up in great detail in the book, but they followed the rules very, very specifically. And one of the rules is you can't send people back to prisoners back to a war-torn country.
Okay.
And so they were still at war. Like Germany was still invading Italy, even though they switched sides. And so they stayed here. They went to like shipyards.
Okay.
They worked in building things, so that freed up people to be able to go work at factories and stuff like that in their own areas. So it was kind of a trickle down kind of a thing. So
that is so cool. And so in these, like in Indiana or Michigan, are there big like Italian neighborhoods because of this?
No, there's not. I would say that most of them ended up in like Boston.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, or New York.
Yeah.
Or a little more east
on the coast.
Yeah. And some stayed. There was a lot of involvement from like especially the Catholic Church and like Catholic organizations coming in. They would have dances with the men, like, and so a lot of there was a lot of like marriages that came out of it.
Yeah.
And sometimes the men stayed, but they were repatriated back into their home country and then like had to come back. That's a very interesting process.
How interesting.
After.
Wow.
So yeah, that was all the interesting stuff I got to find out that I had no idea. You know? Like,
and all from this offhanded comment that your grandmother used to work at a POW camp.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's where it came from. And then it was a separate idea, this idea of like someone famous, like their famous grandchildren there was a question of where they came from, if the story that had been told was actually true.
Right.
And so that's the story that is explored in the modern day. Was what grandma told us and what the story was that actually true about grandma? Or was she just trying to cover, some scandalous things that happened so that she could pass, because there were these codes, morality codes that you had to pass through in Hollywood. And if you didn't meet up to those morality codes, you could not have a career.
Especially as a woman, I would imagine.
Yes.
There was a lot of things that were covered up, I think.
That's what it was, it was all covered up. I mean, everybody was completely salacious at the time. but
they just didn't want it out to the general public.
Yes. But Ingrid Bergman, she had an affair with a married man, and she was open about it, and she was blacklisted, so she was blacklisted for years as a result of that. So it was a real threat. It was really, truly a thing that if you didn't cover it up well, it's not like they stopped doing it. Then, I can't remember which actress, there was an actress who had a baby out of wedlock and pretended to adopt the baby, who was her own child, just so that she could have her own daughter. And she didn't even tell her daughter until her daughter was an adult, that her daughter was her biological child.
My goodness.
Yeah. So that's how tight, that's kind of into my second book, but like,
that's so interesting. I can't wait to read that one too. That'll be fun.
So those are the kinds of things that this is not usually how I explain the book. So it's kind of fun because we're talking about different things, but yeah. So for those morality codes, they're like looking back to be like, what did grandma lie about? That's the modern day timeline.
Nice. So had you written the dual timelines before?
I haven't done back in time I haven't done historical back and forth.
Okay.
So, but several of my books were dual timelines with like past and present, but like with 5 or 6 years between.
Okay. And so how was it balancing the historical and the contemporary?
I will say I started writing them back and forth, and I ended up writing them each individually. So that's what I ended up
That's
doing.
interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and I even told my editor when I turned it in, I'm like, I wrote both of these as their own novels.
Yeah.
Like, they were
And
both
then
about
kind of
like,
figured out where to tuck things in. And yeah.
yeah, yeah. So I knew what the big points were that I
Mhm.
needed to be parallels between the two of them. And so working out some of that timing was interesting. I also had
Yeah.
written a pretty good like synopsis ahead of time and broke it up into that, made it a little easier too.
Yeah.
But I did eventually just write it as two separate pieces, and I feel like that made it so that each storyline felt complete and not like it was just superfluous there, so that we could flip back and forth.
Right. Right. That's interesting. I talked with Reese Bowen one time, and she
Yeah.
had just written a dual timeline one, and it was her first one. And she said that she had to like line her hallway with one of the things and then figure out where the other one fit in. And she
Yes.
very visual and had to
Visual.
actually see it. Yeah.
Yeah,
So
I've done it before where like I will put it on a calendar or I'll do something like that.
yeah.
But this one was so far apart that I wouldn't have been able to
But like you
piece
said, you
it
had the points that had to match
at the
up
points.
between the historical and the contemporary,
Yeah.
and that's a good way to kind of keep you on track, I guess.
Right. And thankfully I had those figured out. I used to be a not a planner. I was not a plotter. I was a pantser, as they say.
Yeah.
I would write by the seat of my pants, be like, oh, what's going to change? I have changed as I've gotten older and as I've written
Interesting.
more books,
Okay.
where I mean, when you're writing a proposal, you have to turn in like a 10-page synopsis, single space, which is it's very detailed.
That
And
is.
I've come to find that if I do that really well, if I really figure out the story ahead of time, things can change, and they do change, like I said, if you listen to your characters. But I find that if I do that, what I'll do is once I get going, I'll break up the rest of the synopsis and put it in like a heading for each chapter before I write it. So then I know, like, all right, this chapter is going to be this. It makes it so much easier for me to draft. And
Nice.
then I can mess with things when I go back if I want to. But lately I've been really into just get that first draft out there, really see how things are, and then mess around with it.
Nice. So do you do you consider yours having like a mystery that runs through them?
I feel like every book that I write is going to have two things. It's going to have some sort of mystery and it's going to have some sort of romance. Like
Okay.
I can't have a book that doesn't have both because I'll be bored. Like everybody loved Harry Potter and I'm like, no, there's no real romance. Like they're 8, which is
Yeah, right.
appropriate, but
But
like
yeah,
I need it. So I could never get into it. I'm like, oh,
that's so
magic.
funny.
Maybe the
Yeah.
adults should be doing this, guys. Like so, but yeah, so I definitely will always have those two things because that's what keeps it interesting for me as a writer.
Right. And it has to. That's
Yeah,
yeah, that's it. You have to stay interested in what you're putting out there. Otherwise you're going to burn out, and
right.
that's not going to work
Absolutely.
very well. So, and you have an element of the truth must come out,
Yes.
and lives might change because of it.
In every book, I think, though, because I think one thing that is like across the board for all of my books is this idea that we put out a facade. Everybody has secrets, everybody has a story, and you can look perfect on the outside, or you're the house. I think I use a house analogy at least one time, probably two, I think in two different books, where it's like the house can look a certain way on the outside, and inside you have no idea what's going on,
Right.
you know? And so I really feel that way about people. And I
Mhm.
love it. Like it's what makes people, this is why I don't like small talk. Like small talk, I just find the most boring thing ever. Cause I'm like, oh, I don't really care how you feel about the weather. I mean, I'm glad you like it or whatever. You
Right,
got to do
right.
those social things. But what I really want to know is like, what was your most traumatic moment in your childhood?
Well, yeah,
Like,
when you get invited into that house of them and
yes.
start seeing some of their different rooms, that's
Yes.
when life becomes real.
I'm
Yeah,
like, tell me
friendships become
more.
real.
Well, and that's when you also see that we all go through stuff. we people, like, the human experience becomes more real at that moment. And I think that's one thing I love about books is it creates empathy, and once you get to experience somebody else's life through
Right.
reading it,
Their
you
truths. Yeah.
exactly, you get to develop empathy that you don't have from experiencing just your one life.
Yeah. That's my book club. I've had it for the last 3 years, and we travel around the world in our books. And so every
Oh, that's
month we
cool.
visit a different place.
Yes.
And we have read books from all around the world. And some of them are American authors that wrote in that country, but some of them
Right.
were people who had lived there. And it's so interesting to see the world from different perspectives, like you said,
Right.
on how different people get through life.
Yeah. Yeah. It
And
changes you. Like,
yeah, and if
I
it
think,
doesn't,
yeah, exactly. I think that's why people can be afraid of books, is
Mhm.
because it can change. They can
Yeah,
change you, you know?
it changes
And
hard.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
And uncomfortable and scary.
yeah, yeah,
So,
yeah. Some people are very comfortable with who they are and where they are, and don't
right.
want to go anywhere else. So yeah, I get
Exactly.
that. That's interesting. You, okay, this is going to be a shift in
Sure.
take a right turn here. So you have on December 9th a totally lit improvised book launch that
Yeah.
sounds so much fun. I wanted to hear
Aw.
about that.
Yes. Well, so I do improv a lot of weekends out of the year on Saturday nights at a local improv theater.
How fun.
And so my publicist was like, "Why don't you mush your two things together?"
Ooh.
And I was like, "How would we do that?" And so kind of came up with this idea of doing a completely like literature inspired night. For the book launch. So it'll be like all literature themed games and activities that
How
we do on
fun.
stage. And I'm actually not performing. I'm just going to be hosting because I'm like, I'll be author Emily that night.
Right? Yeah.
But I have a great cast of people who all have like are writers, teachers,
Ooh.
so they're all coming in. They're improvisers, but they also have a background in literature as well,
Oh, how
which
fun.
yeah, we've been having some fun rehearsals. So I'm really excited for it. They're a great group, and then we'll just do the normal book launch stuff afterwards.
Okay.
And then do a little book signing. And I
That
don't know,
is so
I'm
clever. I
excited.
love that idea.
I'm nervous. Like it's one of those things that's like I've never done this before,
Yeah.
but I am excited to give it a try
It'll
this
be
time.
fun to hear how it goes.
Yeah,
That's fun. And people are going to have a good time, and if
I
it's
think
literature
so.
based, it's going to be book people. So,
Right.
yeah.
And I think it will be, I think that literature people, like book people, we all actually want to be on stage, but we're introverts also. So it's like,
Mhm.
hey, now you can live through some other people who are on stage
Exactly. And it
and
is
participate
funny.
a little bit.
A lot of authors are introverts,
Yes.
and the marketing of their book and the putting themselves out there is the really hard part.
Yes.
And yeah.
I would say I'm extroverted, but I also have introverted. Like, put me in a room of people I don't know, and I am going to be quiet and shy and
Yeah,
nervous. And like, if you put me in charge of something,
that's
I
better.
can
Yeah.
extrovert all day.
Yeah.
But yeah, put me someplace where I don't know anyone, or I have to talk about myself. This is fine, us one on one. I get
Yeah.
but it is
It's
hard. It's a
hard.
scary
Yeah.
thing,
It is
going out
hard.
and like want to, hear about my inner workings of my whole entire life. Okay, cool. Let's talk about them.
It's funny. Yeah. It's interesting how all of that works. It's
Yeah.
we can put a book out there with all kinds of characters, that may be the same as us, maybe different than us,
Right.
whatever. But yeah, when you start having to put your true self out there, that's whew. Or to talk about these people that are flawed or
Yes.
weird or whatever that you
Right.
created.
Right. And then just come up with like all of the things that you need to talk about, like, and it's a very vulnerable experience,
Hmm.
like
Yeah.
it's a very vulnerable experience going out there. And also there are people who are like, stop talking about yourself, or at least that's the fear in
Oh,
your
you're
head.
still doing books.
Yeah. Oh, she's got another one. Okay. But I had to tell myself, like, especially with social media, which can give me some anxiety, is I'm
Hmm.
like, this is my job. Like, I have to remember this isn't me just being like, look at me. This is my job.
Yeah.
Like, and that's okay. It's okay. Like, you don't look at, like, I almost said Sears. I don't even think Sears is a
Are they
business.
around still?
You don't look at a Sears ad and be like, Sears, you're sure getting full of yourself,
Exactly. Right. Geez, are you talking about yourself again?
Geez, those pants sure go high on your waist, like, so yeah, it is an interesting thing that is giving yourself permission. That's what I'm finding as a creative person, is giving yourself permission to go out there is almost harder than anything else you do.
It is hard. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Um, Gosh, I had a question and it just went away.
It's because I said Sears too much. That just
I'm sure.
distracted you.
um, Speaking of characters, who is the favorite character that you have created, do you think?
Let's see. My favorite character. I always say I'm slightly in love with Dave from my first novel,
From
Wreckage.
Wreckage? Uh-huh.
Like, I'll just always have a crush on him a little bit. Though Trombello from this book and the next one, he's the priest character.
Oh, okay.
I like him a lot too. I love Vivian's sister. You don't see a lot of her in this one, but her name is Arya. Really love her. So
Ah,
I don't know.
that's it's hard to
It's
it's
hard
like,
to pick
who's
just
your favorite
one.
child?
I know. I know. I feel like I should cover the ears of all of my books and be like, shh, listen,
But I love you too.
I love you
Just
all.
different.
You're all great.
Yeah,
But yeah,
definitely.
yeah.
That's fun. Awesome. So When We Were Enemies is coming out December 1st. And then the one that's coming after that that you're working on right now, does that have a title yet or?
It has a working title. I don't know if it's the official title yet, but I titled it When We Dared to Dream.
Oh, I love that.
So, because it's just about because she's starts out right before she becomes famous, so it's all of the
Yeah.
dreams that they have
How
and like
fun.
how worthwhile is it to follow those dreams.
Nice. That's really
So,
cool. I love that title. I hope it sticks.
I know, I hope so. You just never know.
You don't. Yeah.
Some books they do. Most of my books have changed, but I guess
Okay.
we'll find out.
Well, if they change it, it'll hopefully be better. So
I'll subtitle it When We Dare to Dream.
there you go. Well, is there a release date on that one yet?
No, it'll be, I think, within 8 months of this one, eight to
Nice.
nine
Okay.
months. So it'll be
That's not
pretty
bad.
fast. You don't have to
Yeah.
wait a full year for that one.
That's
So
awesome. Okay.
yeah.
And do you already have the next one after that
Nope.
lined up?
I
No?
am plotting that one out. So we're in edits right now for When We Dare to Dream. So,
Nice. Okay.
and then
Excellent.
thinking about the next one. Have ideas for the next one, but haven't pitched it yet.
Love it. That'll be fun. So, where can people find you on social media? Where do you like to hang out?
Um, I am on all of the places, but it's just Emily Bleeker author for Instagram and for Facebook, and then TikTok as well. My TikTok content can be sporadic, as some is book related, some is just my life with my family. So just be warned about that. Um, but yeah, and then I am at emilybleeker.com too for my website where I do
Nice.
blog posts and stuff like that.
And you have a newsletter that people can
And I
hop
have a
on to.
newsletter.
Yeah.
Yep.
Awesome. I will make sure I link to those in the show notes.
Okay, great.
And thank you for joining me today. This was a really fun conversation.
Yes, this was so fun. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, happy to. And I'd love to have you again when the next one comes out.
Okay, thank you. I would love that.
Have a great rest of your day.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks for joining me today on the Literary Escape podcast. If you enjoy hearing the behind the book story, then join me in the Literary Escape Society. We're a community of travelers who love books, or maybe book lovers who love to travel. Either way, if you need an escape, a literary escape, come join us as we read our way around the world together, one book at a time.
Check out the show notes to learn more about the Literary Escape Society. And we'll see you next time on the next episode.